the prosecution just called Mr. Mcginniss. Hang on, people. Here we go.
I do.
If you could please make sure to pull that microphone close and speak as loud as you can into it. Thank you. Could you state your name for the record and spell your last name?
Richie Mcginniss. Richie Mcginniss. RICHIEMCGINNISS.
How are you currently employed?
I'm the video director for The Daily Caller.
What is the Daily Caller?
It's a news website.
How long have you been working for the Daily Caller?
Since May of 2017.
When you say you are the video editor, you said?
Technically chief video director.
Chief video director. What are your responsibilities?
I oversee all of the video content that goes up on the website and all of our video and social media platforms.
Is it fair to say that the Daily Caller is an online news source as opposed to, say, a newspaper or a magazine?
Yeah, there's no print.
Okay. And what is your educational background?
I have a bachelor's in Middle Eastern history and Arabic from Georgetown University.
Would you consider yourself a journalist?
I would consider myself somebody who works alongside journalists every day.
When you say you work alongside them, what are the different roles that you have versus the journalists that you work alongside?
So basically the journalists are the ones who actually post articles. I'm the one who, for example, if a journalist is on a location, they record a video, I'm the person who helps them get that video onto whatever platform necessary, as well as packaging the video, distributing it, and just helping them with any technical issues associated with that.
Who were the founders of the Daily Caller?
Neil Patel and Tucker Carlson.
Tucker Carlson is a Fox News personality, is that fair to say?
Yeah.
And did there come a time where you personally showed an interest in covering some of the protests that are going on around the country?
Yes, absolutely.
Can you tell us about what your focus was in that regard?
Well, at the time that the protests erupted in Memorial Day of 2020, it was very clear from the onset that actually two of our reporters, Jorge and Shelby, who were with me in Kenosha, they were in Washington, D.C. I was actually with my family in New York at the time. But that first weekend, there were violent riots and in Washington, D.C. And after that weekend, it was very evident to me that Shelby and Jorge, being young and brave folks, were able to capture aspects of what was going on that I didn't see elsewhere in the media. And that's when it became clear to me that we could show the public a side of what was happening. That
This is kind of background stuff.
Washington, I was in New York with my family. I returned back to Washington
Then Washington, D.C. over the summer of 2020.
to Seattle. We went to Portland. For example, cable places for hours and hours on end.
Covered in Seattle, Portland, etc. Were you ever personally exposed to violence or rioting or arson or anything along those lines?
Yes.
Tell us about some of the experiences that you had at those locations.
Well, Portland, for example, there was a lot of clashing with law enforcement.
He's probably going to ask this guy, and did you ever shoot anybody, or were you armed?
There was a lot of, I saw incendiary devices thrown at police, and Seattle was a situation where we did see some violent clashes between protesters and counter-protesters, and the same in New York as well. Police breaking up the occupied protests, people clashing with the police, and in fact, in New York, for example, if you're one of these people in there, we're dressed up to look just like everybody else. But if you film one of those violent interactions, then it's only a matter of time if somebody sees you that the crowd will turn on you, and that did happen in New York to Shelby and I.
When the crowd turned on you in New York, did you feel like your safety, your personal safety, was at risk?
Yes.
Did you actually suffer any sort of injuries as a result of that?
I bear hugged Shelby and I dragged her out, and no, I did not. I have suffered injuries in these zones, but not in that instance.
I want to move forward to Kenosha. Everybody here is familiar with the shooting of Jacob Blake on Sunday night, August 23rd, 2020. After that, was there a time in which you became interested in coming to Kenosha to cover what was going on here?
Yeah, Shelby and Jorge, who are two of our reporters who I traveled with extensively, implored me to book the trip, and we had lengthy discussions with our editor-in-chief regarding whether or not we should go.
Eventually the decision was made to come here, is that
Correct,
fair to say?
yes.
Do you remember when it was that you first arrived in Kenosha to begin covering these events?
Yes, it was that Monday.
Do you remember approximately what time of day?
It was the afternoon. I'm not sure. It was before it was dark.
There's been a lot of testimony about the events of that night, some of the things that happened around town. Did you personally witness any of that?
Yes.
Can you tell us what you personally witnessed?
Witnessed many cars being burned. I actually, Shelby recorded an interview with some of the individuals in front of, so there's a big car lot that was burned, but then there was the lot actually where the armed individuals were on the night of the shooting. We actually were in front of that business the night before, and Shelby recorded an interview where those individuals were, there were people who, I guess, I guess the owner of the business had asked people to go out and try to put out the fires. So she recorded an interview with individuals who were using a power washer, and there were other people using like buckets to try to put out fires with the cars.
Mr. McGinniss, we have a map on the wall behind you there. I don't think there's going to be dispute that we've established that on Monday night, the car source location, which is at the business, that would be the car.
I believe in Shelby's interview they mentioned that the owner had asked them to come out to put out the fires.
Now, you also mentioned there was a second location, and that would be this car source, which is sort of kitty corner to the southwest. I know you mentioned there were armed individuals there on Tuesday night, right?
Yes, and that's the same business that we saw people with power washers at the night before.
At this location that I'm highlighting here, which is at the southwest corner of 59th and Sheridan, on Monday night, did you see any armed individuals there?
I did not know.
Were there fires at that location on Monday night?
Yes.
Okay. And when you say you saw people putting out fires with pressure washers, were they putting out fires only at that location on the southwest corner, or were they also trying to put out the fires on the northeast corner?
It was only at that one, and I didn't see anybody trying to put out fires on the other one across the street.
Understood. I think the fires were out of control at that point, so I get that. I'm just trying to pin it down. So you told us that you witnessed the fires at those two locations on Monday night. Did you witness any other events on Monday night that were noteworthy?
Yes, I mean there were fires everywhere, and Shelby, Jorge, and I recorded a number of those, including multiple businesses that were also burned.
And you recorded that information and then obviously published stories about it on the Daily Caller website. Is that fair to say?
That's correct. Yeah.
I want to move to the next night, Tuesday night, August 25th, the night of the shooting. Did you come back to that area to view the events of that night?
Well, the way that it happened was we went to the courthouse to document the demonstrations that were happening in front of the courthouse, and then subsequently the police pushed the protesters, demonstrators, rioters, whatever you want to call them, away from the courthouse, and that's actually when everybody ended up in that area.
On Tuesday night, based on what you just described, do you recall approximately when it was that you first got out and were covering things?
We'd been out all day. We were actually, during the day, we were interviewing the owners of the businesses that had been damaged the night before. And so, and also many people from the community in Kenosha came out to help clean up. And so we recorded a bunch of interviews with those folks, as well as getting aerial footage of the damage. And then we went and ate, and then we went back out before sunset as the demonstrators were arriving at the courthouse.
When you said you took video or photos or whatever of people trying to clean up and things like that, did any of that include the defendant, Kyle Rittenhouse?
No.
I know you discussed some of the events that occurred right out in front of the courthouse. Do you recall approximately what time that was when you were here out in front of this building covering things?
We first got out there probably about 7 p.m.
And how long was it before the event occurred that you described as the police pushing people out of the way?
That was after dark, and it was probably closer to 8:30 or 9.
What did you do then?
Well, I was typically in these kind of situations. The goal is to show both what law enforcement are dealing with and what the protesters, demonstrators, rioters, you want to call them. You want to show both situations. So I was in the middle of the protesters on one side and the police on the other, and I actually recorded a variety of things, including things being thrown, bricks being thrown at law enforcement, and then I returned to the hotel because there was no cell service to get Wi-Fi to communicate with folks back in Washington, D.C., as well as post the videos for our team to then redistribute.
What hotel were you staying at?
I forget the name of it. It's literally right there. It's,
Is it the Stella?
Stella, correct.
And that's located a little bit off the map here, I think, to the north, but very close to where all this is happening?
Actually, my hotel window was on the third or fourth floor, and it was overlooking that car lot right there.
That's actually the Stella there, isn't it? Yeah. After you returned to the hotel, you described what you did there. Was there a time when you came back out onto the streets after your time at the hotel?
Yeah, I actually didn't. I didn't even post anything because when I returned to the hotel and got on the internet, I saw armed individuals in front of the same business that we had recorded people trying to put out fires the night prior. And
see, when you lose juries, when they're just sitting here listening to this saying, what does this have to do with the trial? If an attorney is on the ball, he'll put him down and say, how are you? We're going to talk about, some of the videos, and we're going to get to the one particular video, but I want to start with some background. And then people kind of know that this is just background. I don't really have to pay attention. He's going to get to it or what he's going to get to. I still have no clue where the hell he's going with this guy or why he's here.
In my mind, that was a continuation of that story. And so I actually dropped what I was doing. I also had Shelby and Jorge who were out there. And once I saw people who were armed, the situation was clearly escalated in my mind in terms of the level of danger. And part of my role was also to, make sure that none of us were harmed. And so I went outside, back outside, and actually I couldn't see that business from the window, but I could see the car lot across the street from it. And basically, I just ran down the stairs and went right out there and started communicating with Shelby and Jorge to find out where they were.
The business where you saw the armed people out in front of, was that the car source location at the southwest corner of 59th and Sheridan?
Yes.
You mentioned that after seeing them, you felt like the situation was escalating. Why did you feel that way?
Anytime that there are guns, that elevates the level of danger in my mind. Just given that, I've been to, like I said, across the country, many protests in places where people have guns and there's a lot of people in a confined space. These are the kind of situations where everybody's very passionate about why they're out there. So in my mind, that the presence of weapons meant that, I should be on the ground and Shelby, Jorge, and I should be as close to each other as possible to ensure that, we're all safe.
So did you feel that the presence of guns at that location, did it make you concerned about the safety of your reporters?
Yes.
He just said that. He knows he's got this guy on the hook, that he's scared of guns and he got pink panties and he doesn't own a gun, and somehow he thinks a gun is bad. Not that the people are throwing bricks and lighting fires and raping and robbing and doing all these crimes. That's not the problem. It's when guns are there, I'm worried. Really?
So you said you ran down the stairs of the hotel, and did you go then after, if you left the hotel, did you go directly to that location, that car source at 59th and Sheridan?
Mm-hmm.
Is that a yes?
Yes, sorry. Yeah.
Now, you've referred to guns. Are you familiar with guns yourself?
I'd say familiar.
One of the guns that we've talked about already in this case is, it's technically a Smith & Wesson M&P 15, but it is an AR-15 type rifle.
Yep.
Are you familiar with that type of rifle?
I've shot it.
And when you got to that 59th Street car source location, did you see individuals who were armed with that type of rifle?
Yes, multiple.
Tell us what you did once you left the Stella and went to that location.
I went down and proceeded straight from the hotel to the car source, and basically as I walked up, I saw, I guess there were about 3 on the ground, and I couldn't quite tell how many people were on the roof, but there were like approximately 5 or 6 armed individuals in front of the business. And typically in these situations, especially with armed individuals, I'm just trying to look as unassuming as possible. And so I put my hands up and I said, hey, are any of you guys willing to do an interview about why you're here? Yeah.
Now, you've given interviews to various media outlets about your experiences that night, correct?
Yes.
And at one point you described the appearance of these armed individuals at the 59th Street car source as menacing. Do you recall that?
I don't recall that. What interview was that?
Sure.
I wouldn't say that that's. I would say menacing is not a bad word to describe it. I would say actually, like I said, the presence of weapons, just in my mind, elevates the level of risk.
You did an interview shortly after.
So when police are around, you're nervous because they have weapons and it elevates the risk, right? Please.
After this August 25th incident with someone by the name of Kyle Hooten. Do you know who that is?
Yes, I do.
And in that interview, at one point, you indicated that the group that was armed at 59th Street car source appeared menacing. Would you agree with that?
We can play I would agree. I would say that. I don't know the exact definition of the word menacing. I guess I was using it in a live interview, but I would say that the level of risk was elevated. Is what I would say.
One moment. Kyle Hooten. Do you recognize yourself on the screen?
Yeah.
And do you remember giving this interview to Mr. Hooten?
Yes.
Okay. Can we play the excerpt from 7:12 to 7:47, please?
I basically just walked up to them and said, is anybody willing to do an interview? And Kyle was just the most willing. And obviously that's the kind of situation where you have 5, 6 guys armed with some heavy weaponry.
So now we know why he's here. He thinks Kyle was the most willing, and he must have interviewed Kyle.
Most of them looked like they had AR-15 style rifles, and a couple of them were standing up on the rooftop in the darkness. So it was a menacing situation. So my goal was just to get
So he did say menacing, but he didn't remember it. He was just scared.
my interview and be as non-threatening as possible and get out of there. So when Kyle volunteered himself, I just wanted to go with the path of least resistance. And he actually.
Thanks. Okay. Does that help refresh your recollection?
Yeah.
And this was something that you said within a week or two after the incident?
I was in Kenosha when I recorded that interview. That's in the basement of the hotel.
Oh, okay, good.
That
Thank
was
you.
like maybe a day or 2 after.
Now, when you...
He didn't even know where the interview was. He just guessed. See, he just made that up like he knew, and the guy had to correct him, and he moved on for being a dummy and not knowing.
I think you said in that interview, when you approached the group, you wanted to interview someone from the group. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
How many members of that group did you interview?
1.
Who was that?
Well, I guess Mr. Gulch was the other one who walked into the interview as I was recording, Mr. Rittenhouse, and then we proceeded up the street after that. So if you would constitute that as part of the interview, then 2. But Mr. Rittenhouse was the only one that I interviewed prior to him arriving.
And I think you said Gulch, but actually for the record, that's Ryan Balch.
Balch, sorry.
No
Yes.
problem. Did you ask And for the record here, the person you interviewed, Kyle Rittenhouse, is seated here at council table with the gray suit and the red shirt. Is that
Yes,
right?
correct.
Did you ask him how old he was?
I believe as I was taking out my phone, generally the procedure is, are you willing to do an interview? Yes. Okay, I'm going to record it. Yes. And I believe that I said something along the lines of, how old are you? And I believe the response was something along the lines of, I'm an adult. I actually don't recall because I was doing two things at once. But I just remember the answer being satisfactory enough for me to proceed with the interview.
If the defendant had been honest with you and told you that he was 17.
Oh, so he was lying now. He said he's an adult. Is that lying? Oh, if he had been honest with you. Ah, okay.
Satisfactory enough for me to proceed with the interview.
If the defendant had been honest with you and told you that he was 17, would you have recorded an interview with him?
I would, in those instances, I can record an interview if somebody's a minor, but I need permission from the parents.
Based on what the defendant said to you, whatever the wording was, you had no indication from him that he was 17. Is that fair to say?
I actually told the police the night of that I believe that he was in his mid-20s, but I believe I said exactly that he had a baby face.
We've got the interview that you recorded, and that is exhibit number.
What are you doing out here? Obviously, you're armed and you're in front of this business we saw burning last night. So what's up?
So people are getting injured, and our job is to protect this business, and part of my job is also help people. If there's somebody hurt, I'm running into harm's way. That's why I have my rifle, because I need to protect myself, obviously. But I also have my med kit. Yeah.
And what about these other folks? Obviously, there's some other people who are armed
Their
as well.
job is to protect me.
Gotcha. And then what about these guys up on the roof?
Their job is to provide overwatch and protect me also.
Gotcha.
They're protecting everybody on the roof. We're protecting each other.
Understood. And
We're running medical, and we're going in, and we're getting people.
and what about, are you from the area?
I am from the area.
What brought you out here tonight? You just wanted to provide medical attention?
Provide medical attention to people that need it. If somebody's injured, like, you get hurt, I'm grabbing you.
I'm getting hit with plenty of pepper balls, but as long as it's just bruises. Yeah, I got my mask. I'm good.
All right.
And have you encountered any issues yet thus far with law enforcement or anything like that?
We had a group earlier trying to come and set a fire at the church. So we went to the church and we de-escalated the situation, telling them they need to leave or they will be detained and then later arrested.
This church right over here?
That church right there. And we stopped the fire out all the way down at the school.
Wow. And what do you think it would have been different if the police had to try to stop them from setting the fire?
I feel like there would be a lot more casualties and a lot more people injured. So I think the police are fine where they're at and like, let us run the medical because EMS is not coming in. This is considered a red zone to the EMS fire. They are not coming in.
Yeah.
So us citizens, we need to help each other. Me and him are out here running and seeing if people need medical attention.
But speaking of which, we need to go check see if somebody got hurt again.
All right.
Understood.
You want to follow us? You're fine.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Right, and this might be one there.
You are, at this point in the video, walking south along Sheridan behind the defendant and Ryan Balch. Is that right?
Correct.
At that moment, given what you've told us about why you were out there and the coverage you've done with other events around the country, why did you decide at that moment to follow them?
Well, during the interview, he mentioned, what his mission was there, and it seemed to me that they were proceeding to, try to do what he was talking about, and I wanted to record it.
Can we please play exhibit number 17?
Anybody need medical?
So you guys are kind of like medics who are packing.
Yeah,
right?
basically. Well, he's an EMT, and
Gotcha.
I'm just kind of protecting his ass.
Oh, so you're a certified EMT? Gotcha. And do you work as an EMT normally?
I just got the thing. I'm a lifeguard normally. I got my ALS and I got my
Gotcha.
The defendant tells you that he is an EMT. Is that right?
Yes.
Did he say anything else to you? It's a little hard to hear in the video as to what his qualifications were.
I believe he mentioned something about lifeguard certification.
In your experience at the various events that you've covered, similar to what was going on in Kenosha, Seattle, Portland, etc., have you seen other individuals who proclaim themselves to be medics or EMTs who are armed with AR-15s?
I don't recall any people who, I saw a lot of people who were medics, some of whom were armed, but not with an AR-15 that I recall.
When you saw these other medics who were armed, what sort of things had they armed themselves with?
I just recall specifically in Seattle, a medic armed with a handgun.
Other than that one medic with a handgun, do you recall seeing any other medics in any of the other events that you covered who armed themselves with a gun?
No.
Do you recall seeing any others that armed themselves with an AR-15?
No.
We can continue the video, please.
And I'm former Army infantry, and I got a whole bunch of trial training.
Well, thank you for your service.
We got you.
I appreciate the service.
Oh, yeah.
There. Do you? It appears Mr. Balch reacts to something at this point in the video. Do you know what that was?
That was I believe it was a brick that was thrown at, a piece of a brick that was thrown at the armored personnel carrier right there.
Did it bounce off towards you guys or something? Do you know?
Yeah, it bounced off in front of us.
Okay. Thank you. Please continue.
Thank you. Get down the rack. Careful, right down that white back rack.
medical? We're running through out over here. Anybody need medical? Medical? Fire extinguishers are here to put out the fires. They know. Okay, good. They know. You just got shot up. You guys? It's all right. Wait, shot. I'm not shot. You just said you got shot. No, I thought you got rubber bullet. Oh, no, I just got rubber bullet. Yeah. No, it didn't even leave a weld. It just stung. It just fucking stung. I knew.
Little pepper boy never hurt anybody.
It was literally just like,
It's a little spicy, that's all.
it was like, oh shit. That was really annoying.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Could you please not? Does anybody need medical? Does anybody need medical?
I think someone's got some medical weed, I'll tell you that.
I hope somebody asked this guy who's been in all these riots, has anybody ever jumped medical and taken their medical bag or tried to take things from them? Or even non-medical. Have you seen people getting jumped and getting robbed in the middle of these? You said earlier you were in danger or you were in fear of your safety. What were you in fear of? That somebody would steal your stuff, steal your camera, beat you up? What were you in fear of? And just to reiterate that this was a dangerous situation and having a gun wasn't that stupid. In fact, it was probably pretty smart. Kyle could be dead. Nobody wants to say that, but those guys could have easily killed him.
Does anybody need medical? Medical! Anybody need medical? You were just the one to get off the car. Trying to help you off the car. Now you talking medical? I remember you said get off the car. You talking about medical? Yeah. Does anybody need medical? Medical!
Well, yesterday or today?
Today. He just had another gun. Get off the car. Now you talking about medical?
What car over in the dealership? Sorry, I don't know. Hey, if you want to.
Mr. Mcginniss, the video we just watched was...
Let's take a break at this point. Please don't talk about the case. Read, watch, or listen to any account of the trial.
All right, taking a break. And we're back.
Mr. Mcginniss, when we left off, we had finished watching the video that is entitled Richie Mcginniss Walking with Kyle. It is the one in which you followed him south along Sheridan. And at some point in the video, the defendant encounters a group of individuals. The most noteworthy of one is wearing bright yellow pants. Do you recall that?
I do, yeah.
And there's some interaction between the defendant and that individual, and then the defendant walks across Sheridan Road, but you stayed.
Yes.
Why was that?
Well, Kyle had told me my goal going into these protest zones is to tell the full picture, our goal. And after interviewing Kyle, or Mr. Rittenhouse, it was clear, what he thought his mission was there. But these individuals seemed to think differently, and so I wanted to hear what their opinion was on the matter, because that would be part of providing the complete picture.
And the individual in the yellow pants accused the defendant of pointing his AR-15 at that individual. Is that fair to say?
I believe he said, yes, something along the lines of, you were waving the gun, you think you're in a movie.
When you approached those individuals to speak with them, you took your, was it your phone that you were recording?
Yes.
You took your phone and you stopped recording. You pointed it to the ground, and then after a while it stopped.
Yeah.
We've established you're a video director for your website. Capturing video is one of the things you do. Why did you stop recording that interaction?
There were 4 individuals there, and you can see in the video one of them had large rocks in his hands. And, it's a public street, so generally speaking, but just from the perspective of an ethical perspective as a journalist or somebody providing content, you generally want to get the permission of people if you want to conduct a proper interview. When I walked up to them, one of the individuals who had these bricks in his hands stepped out on me like he was going to smash my head. So I put my phone down and I told them, I'm not going to record. I just want to know why you guys are mad.
Did you ever ask any of them for permission to record them?
I did. So based on this guy's actions, they didn't want to be recorded. So I actually I was more concerned with why they were mad than actually getting it on video, just from the perspective of gathering information.
As someone who works in journalism and takes video, gathering information without having a record of it doesn't do much good, though, does it?
It can, because it does do good, because you can, from that information, then ascertain other individuals to talk to, and also I think there's an aspect of gaining somebody's trust before you conduct an interview. So a lot of times it's helpful to speak with people about why you're there, why you want to interview them, and then maybe try to restart and say, hey, now that we're on the same level, can I do this interview?
So the question I asked you right before that last one was, did you ask any of those individuals for permission to record them? And I don't believe you answered that question, but I'm assuming the answer is no, based on what you've told us.
I actually mentioned that I was going to stop I stopped my phone and I said, listen, guys, I'm not recording this. I just want to know what the deal is. Why are you guys mad? So it was clear to me that there was no permission to be granted because the guy had bricks in his hands and he wanted to.
And again, I don't mean to be overly formal, Mr. Mcginniss, but the question is, did you ask them for permission?
I did not.
Understood. And obviously, they never verbally gave you permission, correct? They didn't ever say anything like, hey, go ahead, you can record us. Nothing like that.
No, they did not.
You took their reaction to you, this physical movement, as a sign that you shouldn't be recording them. Is that fair to say?
That is fair to say, yes.
You mentioned that one of the individuals had some things in his hand. I think at one point you said rocks, and another one I think you said bricks.
Well, it was like I guess bricks wouldn't be the right word either because they're like gray. So I guess generally a brick would be like red. They were like pieces of
concrete,
a gray stones that you would use to build a building.
Okay. How many of these individuals did you speak with that are all in a row there? Do you remember?
I talked to all of them.
But how many were there total?
There were 4.
Okay. And one you said had a couple of rocks or stone in his hand?
Yeah, one had like one in each hand, and then another one had like a stone in one hand, and then it was like a strap, leather strap, something like that. That seemed to be, couldn't tell if it was attached because it was in his hand. I believe, yeah, those are the only guys who had rocks in their hands. There were 2 of them.
Okay. Other than what you've just described, did you see any other weapons of any kind on any of those 4 people?
At the time, I did not, but in hindsight, I believe that one of them was armed with a handgun.
With a handgun?
Yes.
Okay. The person who was wearing yellow pants did not have any sort of weapon, correct?
No.
Okay.
Not that I can see.
So just so we're clear, at that moment when you were dealing with those 4 individuals, you perceived 2 of them to have...
He should have objected to calls for a conclusion. He doesn't know if he had weapons. He can ask him, did you see any weapons on him? And he can say no. But to ask him, he didn't have any weapons, and him to agree is inappropriate because he's asserting a fact for the jury that he was unarmed, when in fact, we do not know that he was unarmed or whether he had a gun or not. So this is a sleazy DA side trick to confuse the jury and to make them think he was unarmed.
Rocks in their hands. And that was the extent of any sort of weapon that any of them had that you saw at that time.
That I saw, yes. But in these kind of situations, it's never really clear who's armed and who's not. I was still unsure of...
Good for this guy. He's answering good. Even though the DA doesn't want to hear this, he's going to cut him off and move on.
my safety in that situation.
Were you armed?
No.
Can you help us understand what it was about these 4 individuals who, by the way, all 4 of them are black, correct?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
What was it about these 4 individuals, 2 of whom had rocks in their hands, that made you concerned about your safety?
Hopefully they're angry, holding weapons, and saying he pointed a gun and being aggressive and moving up on me. Hopefully that's his answer. We'll see.
Well, the way that the one stepped out on me, it was like he was presenting the rocks as if he was ready to smash my head. And he stepped out in my direction, at which point I kind of took one step back. And in those kind of situations, I was trying to keep my distance to ensure that, if he's going to advance closer, then I'm going to take that many steps backwards to keep our distance. Yeah.
Do you have any idea why this individual stepped forward towards you in such an aggressive manner?
It was because of my phone. Because I believe that it was because he perceived me to be recording him, and he didn't want to be recorded.
Once you stopped recording, did his...
Which probably means he had a warrant. Of course, the DA is not going to say that, but people who have warrants and who are wanted don't want their picture because then the cops will be able to find them and see who they're with. If he's on parole or probation, and as part of his probation is he can't hang out with other felons or gang members, and now he's hanging out with gang members, they don't want to be videotaped because now they got evidence that they're violating their parole.
So I put my phone down, and then I told him I'm not recording, I just want to know what happened, and his demeanor did not change. And he still had the rocks in his hands as if he was ready to hit me. And so then I said, hey guys, let's take a step back here for a second. Does anyone want to, I generally carry like cigarettes and White Claws to diffuse these kind of situations. It's like a tactic, people are always really angry in these areas, and that's a good way to, I guess, break the ice.
So in your experience in these types of crowds, you have experienced anger, threatening behavior, that sort of thing before. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
And one of the ways you've learned to diffuse the situation is to offer individuals something like cigarettes.
Anything, yeah, cigarette or White Claw. That's generally.
White Claw is a hard seltzer, an alcoholic beverage in a can.
And actually, I had 2 in my gas mask bag, and I just said, does anyone want a White Claw? And it's like, people generally think it's kind of funny, and oftentimes take me up. And it's a good tactic to kind of, because the goal here is to elicit their truth, what they think is the reality in this situation. And so my goal is to basically make them feel comfortable telling me what they think the truth is, and that's one tactic to achieve that.
So when you offered these guys a White Claw, did they take you up on it?
One of them did, yeah, the guy who was squatting down in the image.
So you handed him the White Claw?
I said, do any of you want a White Claw? I had my hands up, and I said, I'm going to reach it. And actually the guy was squatting down, he started to stand up, he said, I'll take one. And I pulled it out, and I used the bartend, so I cracked it for him and then handed it to him.
So you gave them a total of 1?
1, yes.
This individual you described with the rocks who stepped forward.
Now they're going to charge him with distributing alcohol without a license. That would be classical. Bailiff, take this guy into custody. We're going to charge him as soon as he's testifying.
To you. Can you demonstrate for us the manner in which he was holding those rocks? Because you made it sound like he was about to hit you with them or something.
Yeah, he was like holding it as if like he was ready to fight, but with rocks. So, he was kind of in an athletic position, and he stepped out and
Took a boxing and fighting stance, a threatening. He encroached on me. He aggressively moved toward me and made me feel threatened.
in front of the other guys towards me like that.
How close did he get to you?
About 8 feet.
Did he
I
ever?
took a step back when he took a step forward, and actually that was part of the reason why they thought my actions were so funny to them, was that I was so scared and so ready to run away.
You say they thought your reactions were funny. How do you know they thought that they were funny?
Because they all laughed when I asked them if they wanted a White Claw. Actually, after that, once I gave it to the one individual, they started making fun of the guy with the rocks, saying, "Oh, you think you're so tough? Like, there's one of him and 4 of us, and like, look at how scared he is."
Sounds like at that point, whatever tension was gone.
Correct.
And this individual stepped forward with the rocks. Did he ever throw a rock at you?
No, and actually, he put his hands down at that point once his friend made fun of him.
Okay. You were never harmed in that incident in
No,
any way?
nope.
All right. So we've seen the end of that video, which at that point you are talking with those 4 individuals when you stop recording on your phone. Is that fair to say?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Sure. We just watched a video of you following the defendant and Ryan Balch down south on Sheridan. You encounter the individual with the yellow pants and the other 3 individuals next to him. You walk up to them after the defendant walks away. You start to have a conversation with those individuals, the 4 of them, and you stop recording.
Yes.
Okay. What I want to know is, after you stop recording, how long did you spend talking to those guys?
It was a matter of minutes. I'd say less than 5 minutes. That whole interaction that I just described was probably about 2 minutes, and I talked to them for maybe another minute after that.
After that, what happened?
I got back to my task at hand, which was inquiring about why they were mad at who I later found out to be Mr. Rittenhouse. And they said something along the lines of, "Yeah, we were over there, we were jumping on some cars, and he came up with his gun." And that was actually, right then, was the point that I saw Mr. Rittenhouse running down the street, and I said, "Hey guys, I gotta go."
Are you able to show us on that map, when you saw the defendant running, which you just described, where was that on that map? Are you?
So they were pissed off at Kyle for protecting property and getting them off cars that they were destroying. So that's why they were pissed. And the DA isn't worried about that. The DA is only worried about why Kyle pointed his gun at him when he walked over, or sweeped them, or pointed in their direction, and how they didn't attack him. And just because he was scared, they never hit him. I mean, this DA is, man, I've seen some unethical weasel guys, and I get he wants to win, but man, he's taking this to a new level of low.
You able to show us that?
It was like, let's see, so we were right in this green right here. We were approximately right here at the green in the parking lot, and he was running this way.
Okay, you just kind of drew a line all the way from 60th down to 63rd. Are you able to be a little bit more specific as to where he was when you saw the defendant running?
So you're saying we're right in front of this, we were over here.
It's labeled the Ultimate Convenience Center, but at times these things don't translate into the record. Between the church and Sheridan Road, there's a parking lot area there, and you've kind of pointed to that as where you were talking to these 4 gentlemen. Is that a fair summary of the location?
I believe I...
So what he's talking about, it doesn't read in the record. When people point at things and say things in trial, the court reporter can't type that. So you'll have often DAs or somebody repeating, okay, so you pointed to 5th and 6th Street, and then you pointed, he took a path south from 6th, and at 5th, he went westbound. Is that what I just saw you point to? And then he'll agree. So now there's a record that's typed. So if this case goes to appeal, the judges, when they're reviewing this, can review the transcripts and understand what was said, when it was said, how it was said, and what exactly was going on. That's why you'll hear them a lot when a guy nods his head and goes, mm-hmm. They'll go, is that a yes? Because they want yes in the record or no in the record. And that's important as the case goes through the appellate process.
Actually, it was a little bit further south, so it was like somewhere right around here.
Okay.
So sorry, it was actually just a bit farther. Is this south or?
The bottom of the map is south.
Bottom of the map is south, so it was a bit farther south than that, yes.
Okay. And you saw the defendant running. Was the defendant in Sheridan Road when you saw him running?
Yes.
Did you see anything in his hands when you first saw him?
Yes.
What did you see?
He had one of those small fire extinguishers that you saw earlier in the video. It was that size fire extinguisher in one hand and the AR-15 in the other.
What did you do next?
I told the guys that I had to go, and I proceeded after Mr. Rittenhouse.
Why?
Because, he had a fire extinguisher in his hand. So, I perceived that as he was running to some kind of event that was taking place that would be newsworthy.
What did you do after that?
I started jogging after him, and he was quite far in front of me, and I called my coworker Shelby to inquire where she was, because seeing the way that he was running and the fact that he had a fire extinguisher in his hand, I said something along the lines of, I won't use the expletive language that I was using, but something's about to go down. Where are you? We should make sure we're close to each other.
You said you made a phone call to Shelby?
Yes.
Where were you physically when you made that phone call?
So I was here. I was probably right around this gas bag for the White Claw, and then I ran off without clipping it back. My gas mask actually fell out of the bag. So what happened was the gas mask fell out. I picked it up, I put it back in the bag, I clipped the bag, and then I pulled my phone out to call Shelby. So it was probably actually just south of there by the time I got on the phone with her.
You have given an interview in which you indicated that your attention was drawn, or when you saw the defendant running, that you felt that he was drawing the attention of the crowd. Do you recall saying that in one of your interviews?
Yeah, I think in that interview, I was referring. Which interview are you referring to?
I think it's the one that you gave to Tucker Carlson, actually, but I'm not.
Okay, I believe that I was referring to him shouting medical, and I did notice that when he was running, there were a lot of people looking in that direction. There were like, in this area, this parking lot here, there were like dozens, if not hundreds, of protesters or rioters or whatever you want to call them, right in here. And so when he was running, it was like kind of people directed their attention that way for sure.
You also said that you felt that this was going to be a hairy situation. You also characterized it as a dangerous situation. Do you recall that?
Yes, the combination of the fire extinguisher and the fact that he was running indicated to me that something was about to happen. Potentially, if there's a fire involved. That's why I wanted to get a hold of Shelby and find out where she was.
Did you also feel that the defendant running with an AR-15 through this type of crowd could cause a problem?
In my mind, in that moment, I couldn't think of a situation that would necessitate somebody running through a public street with one of their hands occupied by a fire extinguisher and the other one occupied by a weapon, kind of serving dual roles there. It seemed to me.
Maybe he was holding his weapon, and hopefully the defense will say, isn't it reasonable that if he's running with the fire extinguisher, he only has one hand, he doesn't want the gun bouncing around and hitting him in the legs and ribs and possibly shooting or pointing at somebody. So by him holding the gun, he was keeping the gun in a safe direction while trying to control it. Hopefully the defense will get that in.
Yeah, it's not the way that I was taught to handle a weapon in a public place.
Did it seem a contradiction to you to have a weapon in one hand and a fire extinguisher in the other?
I wouldn't say contradiction. I would say that, all these, like in these protest zones, there's like everybody's kind of serving a role. So there were like those punk rockers that we saw, the skateboarder dudes. They were clearly like kind of a fire brigade type because they all had fire extinguishers. And you have like people who are medics. You have all kinds of different roles. I wouldn't say necessarily contradictory because generally speaking, I just wouldn't deem that to be a contradiction.
The punk rockers, the fire brigade that you described, did you see any of them with guns?
I did not know.
Did you feel that carrying around an AR-15 was incompatible with the role of a medic or...
Why does his feeling matter? How is that relevant? He's not trained. He doesn't know Kyle's training. Why is he being allowed to testify on how he feels?
The fire brigade?
I wouldn't use the word incompatible.
Certainly doesn't match up, though.
I don't know exactly what you're getting at, but I wouldn't say... I don't know what matching means here in this instance, if you could clarify that.
So you indicated that when you saw the defendant running, you left those four individuals and followed. You described a point in that process where the gas mask fell to the ground, you picked it up, whatnot. Did there come a time when you were following the defendant when he was no longer running?
Right about... I was on the phone with Shelby at the time, and right about when he slowed down, I was still running to catch up. So he did slow and stop, down around where the eventual shooting took place.
So he starts running, walks for a bit, and then there's a time after that when he begins to run again. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Where were you in relation to the defendant as you're following him down Sheridan Road?
I could just...
Running?
Yes, I was running to catch up with them.
When you eventually caught up to him, how close were you behind him in the end?
So it's hard to, I guess, from the point where he was slowed down, when I caught up to him, it was just a moment after that he started running again. So I guess at that time, I was probably like 30 feet back.
And you described that the defendant then began running again.
Yes.
Was there any event that you perceived, that you heard or saw, that attracted your attention at the same time that the defendant started running?
There were a lot of people yelling.
Do you know what they were yelling?
There were a lot of screams. I heard like an N-word, and you can hear in the video that the friendly, but it was mostly just yelling. I didn't hear really anything decipherable.
We've heard some references to that friendly. Now, I know it's hard, Mr. Mcginniss. I'm going to try and ask you to put yourself back in the mindset of that evening. I assume since that evening, obviously you said you've given a lot of interviews, correct? So,
I gave as many interviews as I felt necessary to inform the public of what I saw.
And I wasn't trying to make it exaggerate or anything like that, but
No, that's
you've
fine.
given some interviews. There have been a lot of videos out there on the internet. I assume you've watched some of those. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Okay. If we can try our best to put aside what we've learned since then and
Mm-hmm.
try and go back to that moment, and I'd like you to tell the jury what you were thinking and observing in that moment without the benefit of hindsight or other videos or things like that. Is that
Yes,
fair? Okay.
yes.
You mentioned friendly. At that time, that moment, in that evening, do you recall hearing that?
I do not. I recall I was on the phone as well, so I was talking to Shelby, and I recall hearing the yelling while I was still on the phone, and I said something along the lines of, "Oh, expletive, I gotta go," and I hung up on Shelby. At which point, that's when the running had started. Like I was already basically running with Mr. Rittenhouse and later Mr. Rosenbaum at that moment.
So let's continue at where you just left off. Please tell us what happened next.
It was hard for me to see because, like I said, I was like 30 feet back at the time, but I could see a lot of yelling. I could hear a lot of yelling, and I could see there was a crowd of people in the street, and one individual, Mr. Rosenbaum, advancing towards Mr. Rittenhouse, as well as a couple of other individuals who were moving very quickly in the area. But it was hard for me to see because I was a little bit back, and it was dark.
What happened then?
Mr. Rosenbaum advanced towards Mr. Rittenhouse. Mr. Rittenhouse gave I think he maybe saw him coming and gave kind of I said on the night of to police that it was like a juke, but it was more like just a pivot and a run.
Please continue. What happened after that, as far as you recall?
And then he pivoted and he ran towards this part, and Mr. Rosenbaum ran after him, and I was behind both of them.
So the sequence of the folks that were involved in this running, as we've seen in many other videos, is Mr. Rittenhouse is in front, Mr. Rosenbaum is running after him, and you are behind Mr. Rosenbaum. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
How far back from Mr. Rosenbaum were you as the pursuit went through the car source parking lot?
Well, it's hard to say because I kind of caught up to them. I was running a bit faster, and so at the time initially I was probably 30 feet back when everybody first started running. But then by the time I arrived in the lot, I was 15 feet.
And you continued to be behind Mr. Rosenbaum at the time that the defendant shot and killed him, correct?
I did alter my trajectory a little bit when I saw Mr. Rittenhouse turn around and saw Mr. Rosenbaum lunging for the front portion of the rifle.
Okay. Let me stop you there for a second. First of all, we know now that individual who was shot and killed by the defendant was Joseph Rosenbaum.
Mm-hmm.
At the moment this was all going on that night, did you have any idea who that person was?
No clue.
Had you ever heard the name Joseph Rosenbaum?
I'd never even seen that individual.
Up until these events, you had not seen that individual at any time?
No, I had not.
Okay.
I saw videos after the fact of where he was, but I actually wasn't at that location, that gas station at that time.
And again, I want to hear what you saw and what you know and not
Gotcha.
other stuff. In the videos of this incident, you appear to be...
Notice how he glossed over that he grabbed or he lunged for his gun? He doesn't want that to be in there. But he said Rittenhouse tried to disarm him. The defense needs to make sure that that was a crime. That was a felony. What do you think he would have done if he got that gun? And he'll say, I don't know. I can't conclude. Crawford, he'll object. But I would still be planting that seed because the DA is planting all these seeds like nobody else was threatened, nobody else was armed, a guy holding concrete is a good guy, just because he's black, why were you threatened by... I mean, the DA is just being so disingenuous and lying, and it's just really sickening that this is our criminal justice system.
be holding up your cell phone. Is
Yes.
that fair to say?
Correct.
Tell us about that.
So I got off the phone with Shelby, and I wasn't sure what was going to happen, so I attempted to record on my phone, and I thought that I was recording at the time. It turns out that I actually just took a live photo of the ground. I assume at the time that I pressed what was the photo button instead of the record button, the video button.
So
I
as
hate
you're
when
running,
that
you're holding up
happens.
the phone thinking you're recording video, but in fact you're not. Is that fair to say?
Yes, the video did not start until, and I've turned all this over, I'm sure you've reviewed it,
Sure.
but it did not start until just as I was arriving over Mr. Rosenbaum after he had been shot. So I don't know what happened in that period of time. I wasn't even looking at my phone. Usually when I'm recording, I'm constantly looking at what the video is recording to make sure that, everything's in the frame and whatever. But at that time, obviously I was fixated on the situation in front of me rather than my phone, so I didn't realize that it wasn't recording. And I don't know what happened or why it started later.
What was it about the situation in front of you? You said you were fixated on it. What was it about the situation in front of you that focused your attention?
Well, we were running very quickly, number one, so I was just...
I hope he says, man, I saw a crazy guy chasing a guy with a gun saying, shoot me, and I ain't afraid of you, punk, and I knew that something was going to go on. Then I saw him lunge and try to take this guy's gun, and that's when he got shot. Man, I would love for him to answer like that, because that's what happened.
Just by virtue of the fact that I was running, I was focused on that, but also I knew, having seen Mr. Rittenhouse earlier and just using my eyes at that time, that he was armed, and also there was a bag that was thrown by Mr. Rosenbaum, And so clearly there was like, something about to happen, so I was paying attention to that.
Did you ever see a weapon on Mr. Rosenbaum?
I did not.
Never saw a gun on Mr. Rosenbaum?
Oh my God!
Never saw
here
him
we
have a
go.
knife?
Nope.
Never saw him have a club or a bat or a chain or anything like that?
I just saw the bag that was thrown. That was it.
As the chase is occurring in the car source parking lot, did you hear, and again, I want you to go back to that moment.
Yes.
We've seen other videos, we've heard other videos, so we have hindsight. But in that moment, as you are following the chase behind Mr. Rosenbaum, behind Mr. Rittenhouse, did you hear Mr. Rosenbaum say anything?
There was a FU. And at the time in that instance, my recollection of it the night of, it was really hard for me to decipher, whether that was who yelled at. After seeing the footage, it's very clear to me who yelled it.
Okay,
And
let me
after,
stop. I don't want to, I want to, in that moment,
See, he doesn't want him to say what really happened. I want you to guess that he didn't have a gun and tell me that he didn't have a knife, he didn't have a bat, he didn't have any weapon, right? I want you to conclude that without knowing, but I don't want you to tell me what you heard later that we know is true now. What a weasel.
Yeah.
I'm interested in your perceptions of the sounds around you. So I understand there's a lot going on and it's a scene, but put yourself back in that moment. Do you recall hearing Joseph Rosenbaum say anything?
No.
Do you recall hearing the defendant
I mean,
say
I
anything?
heard things said, but I don't recall it coming, me perceiving it coming from him because, like, for example, in that instance, there was a pop, and then when Mr. Rittenhouse turned around, my focus was purely on the barrel of the weapon and where that was going, so I didn't.
Okay. In fact, when you were talking to the Kenosha Police Department after this incident, and very shortly thereafter, you were asked if you heard any words exchanged between Mr. Rosenbaum and Mr. Rittenhouse, and you said no.
Yeah,
Remember saying that?
well, then that was the phrasing of the question, which is, were there words exchanged? And so that would imply, like some kind of conversation. If they had asked, did you hear Mr. Rosenbaum yell anything, I might have phrased it differently because I just didn't focus on that at the time. But the way that, there was nothing exchanged, that's that I saw.
So let's continue. You just mentioned hearing up.
When he goes, let's continue, that means I don't like what you just said. I don't want to concentrate and I want the jury to forget it. Let me move on quickly. What a weasel.
Pop sound. Was that during this chase?
That was right before Mr. Rittenhouse turned around during the chase, yes.
Okay. And just to finish that thought up, you're talking about when Mr. Rittenhouse turns around and shoots Joseph Rosenbaum.
Correct.
Just before that, there was a pop sound.
Correct.
Again, with the benefit of hindsight.
Yes.
But let's put that aside. In that moment, as you are running, first of all, did you hear that pop as you were running?
I did hear the pop, but given like the environment, it's not that uncommon to hear those kind of pops. So at that time, it was not clear to me that it was from a gun or what it was from. In fact, I did tell police that it was my understanding that he turned around because he felt like he was running into a corner because that area of the parking lot where the shooting actually took place was like there's the wall right here and then there was like cars parked kind of. So it at night of, it appeared to me that he turned around because he had reached a dead end or something like that.
Great. He had no escape path. He felt trapped. He was being chased, stalked. A guy was saying, "You don't scare me," running at him, and then grabs his gun when he was boxed in. Man, I hope the defense jumps all over that.
Could you please pull up Exhibit 25?
This is going long, but I'm going to stay with him.
Into evidence, and we've heard some testimony about it. Have you ever seen this before?
I saw screenshots of this thermal footage.
Okay. Was that from yesterday or the day before during the trial?
Yeah.
Okay. There's been testimony that there is an individual with a circle around them identified as person of interest number 1. That is Joseph Rosenbaum. There is a square around a second individual who is identified there as person of interest number 2. That is the defendant, Kyle Rittenhouse.
Mm-hmm.
You will come into this video, if you're not already on it, behind all of them, so I'm sure you'll be able to recognize yourself. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to play this forward a little bit so you can see it. I'd like you to pay attention to the movements of the three of you, Mr.
Yep.
Rosenbaum, yourself, and the defendant, and then I'll ask you a couple questions about it. So
Okay.
if we can play it forward, please. Let's pause it there, please. Were you able to see yourself on that video?
Yes.
And it shows you, can we back up about 10 seconds, please? Go back a little bit further, please. 10 more seconds. Okay, continue there. Go forward, please. Or play it, rather. Thank you. Pause there. I don't know if it's possible, Mr. McGinniss, are you able to see yourself on that video at that very moment?
I think I'm one of those two people.
Okay. Let me continue forward, and unfortunately,
It's hard
that
to tell.
doesn't
I
work
think
on
I'm
TV.
right.
So
Oh, gotcha.
let's continue forward, and I'll pause in just a little bit here.
Yeah, now I can see me.
All right,
Yeah.
pause. Mr. McGinniss, I've got a Sister Marciana's pointing device, which is allowed us to use. Could you please use this and go up to that screen in the corner, and can you point out yourself on that video?
I think it's hard to see right here, but can you just go back for a second?
Yeah, why don't we rewind it?
Right under the text.
Yeah, we'll go. Okay. Okay, can you hold it up there one more second for that? Okay, so just for the record, you are pointing to an area that is on the screen to the left of a vehicle that has, right or wrong, been referred to as a Duramax. Is that a thing, a Duramax? Is it? A Duramax vehicle. I know from other videos that this vehicle is parked in a way that the hood of the vehicle is to the lower left, or sorry, you're pointing to an area that is near the right, or the rear pass. Okay. All right, let's continue the video forward, please. Pause. Can you use your Sister Marciana's pointer to show us where you are? Okay, just can you hold it up there for a second longer so we can make sure we all see it? Okay. That is you. Now, I can tell from that video that there appears to be part of your body extended forward. Is that your arm holding the cell phone? Okay. Was that your right arm with your phone?
Usually going to be
Fair enough. Thank you.
That's good.
You can leave that up there, that's fine. Thank you. You can go ahead and have a seat, please. Maybe a frame or two before Mr. Rittenhouse fires and the shots at Mr. Rosenbaum. And everyone can see where you're at in relation to that. What I'd like you to do, Mr. McGinniss, is tell the jury in your own words, what was going on at this particular moment where we stopped in the video.
So basically, I was running behind Mr. Rittenhouse and Mr. Rosenbaum, and like I mentioned before, Mr. Rittenhouse turned around and Mr. Rosenbaum continued, and I was continuing, but then I realized, that they were about to basically collide, and so at that moment, I was still running, but just before the shots, I kind of altered my trajectory of my run a little bit in the direction that I perceived to be out of harm's way.
What do you mean harm's way? You were several feet away from them. What was the harm to you?
Well, once Mr. Rittenhouse turned around and Mr. Rosenbaum continued, it was a very short, very short period of time from when he turned around to when the shots were fired. And basically in that very short period of time, I realized that Mr. Rosenbaum was continuing to advance and that Mr. Rittenhouse was standing still, and that they would be, based on Mr. Rosenbaum's, the way that he was running and then eventually lunging towards the front portion of the rifle, it was clear to me that something with the weapon was about to happen, and I didn't want to be on the wrong side of that.
When you say something with the weapon was about to happen, what do you mean?
Well, it wasn't clear to me whether the weapon would be grabbed or fired or what exactly was going to happen, but it was clear to me that it was a situation where it was likely that something dangerous was going to happen, be it Mr. Rosenbaum grabbing it, Mr. Rittenhouse shooting it. I didn't know, but I knew that my eyes at that moment were, like in this exact moment, were fixated on the barrel of the weapon because I didn't want to end up on the receiving end of that.
You said your eyes were focused on the barrel of the weapon.
Yes.
Where was the barrel of the weapon pointed?
At this moment, when he stopped, it was aimed about 45 degrees at the ground.
Did the aim of the barrel of the weapon change?
It did. And when Mr. Rosenbaum lunged, Mr. Rittenhouse kind of dodged around, and then that's when it was leveled at Mr. Rosenbaum and fired.
What was the position of Mr. Rosenbaum's body when the defendant fired at him?
Well, there were 4 shots, but it was like in one continuous motion. It was like a lunge towards the front portion, a dodge around, and when he missed, his momentum continued forward.
I'm going to stop you for 1 second.
Yeah.
When he missed, who's he?
Mr. Rosenbaum, I'm sorry.
Please
Yes.
continue.
When Mr. Rosenbaum did not make contact with Mr. Rittenhouse, or it wasn't clear to me whether or not they made contact, but what was clear to me was that the trajectory of the rifle wasn't really altered by Mr. Rosenbaum's lunge. So if they did make contact and it was just a glance, it wasn't enough to alter the trajectory of the rifle. But and again, this is just because that was the only thing that I was looking at that point. And it's not clear to me whether he basically fell forward, but that was as...
I'm going to stop you a second because you said he again. Can you
Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Rosenbaum.
Okay. He fell forward.
Yes, like it was as if, if you were to lunge at somebody, if anybody were to lunge, they'd probably stop themselves, from falling face down on the ground, but the shots were fired in the exact instance that his momentum was going forward, and that continued until Mr. Rosenbaum landed on the ground.
When Mr. Rosenbaum landed on the ground after being shot by the defendant, what was Mr. Rosenbaum's body position?
He was lying face down.
Is it fair to say, if I'm understanding your testimony correctly, that when the defendant shot Mr. Rosenbaum was already falling forward?
His momentum, I wouldn't say falling, I would say his momentum was definitely going forward. It's not clear, to me whether he would have, fallen.
He was lunging. He was attacking. He was trying to take his gun away. I hope the defense gets him to say that.
If, the shots hadn't been fired, but certainly his momentum was in the forward direction, and also his hands were out in front of his feet, such that, his center of gravity was beyond where his feet were.
You gave an interview in which you characterized this incident as the defendant shooting Mr. Rosenbaum while Mr. Rosenbaum was falling. Do you recall saying that in an interview?
There were 4 shots, so I don't recall specifically saying that, but was that a direct quote?
Let's put it up on the screen.
So this is good because it sounds like the prosecution thought he was going to be his witness, and it's turning out that he's not that good of a witness for the prosecution. He's actually helping the defense more, and the defense is going to be able...
So, I'll give you a few more minutes. You want to continue?
Could we just finish this little piece up, and then I'll play? Can we play this starting at the 52-second mark?
Rosenbaum pursuing Rittenhouse, and just about 10 or 12 feet behind them as they ran into the parking lot. And what I saw was Rosenbaum pursuing Rittenhouse, and Rittenhouse turned around. Now, right before he turned around, I'm not sure if this was a reason why he turned around, but there was a gunshot, and that's actually visible on video. It's not clear whether or not that gunshot was fired into the air or towards Rittenhouse, but Rittenhouse did turn around immediately after that. And at that point, he went from running away to aiming his weapon at Rosenbaum, and I was actually directly behind Rosenbaum. So I took 1 or 2 steps to my right as Rosenbaum was lunging.
So he's talking about Rosenbaum, and they're showing where he's getting hit in the head with a skateboard.
For the barrel of the rifle, and he was that close to him. And Rittenhouse actually took the barrel of the rifle and just dodged around. And at that point, as Rosenbaum was falling forward, he fired quickly 4 shots into Rosenbaum. And at that point, I was only about...
We just played an excerpt from a video interview that you did with Tucker Carlson on Fox News. Do you recall this interview?
Yes.
And the date of this interview is August 28th, 2020.
Yes.
Does that sound about right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's 3 days after the event occurred. Is that fair to say?
I think it was so it happened on a Tuesday, and I believe that was Friday.
Sure, 3 days later. Fair to say that...
Actually, if it happened on a Friday and it was a Tuesday, it was 4 days. That would be Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, Mr. Poindexter.
On Friday after this incident, your memory of it might be better than it is 14 months later?
See, anytime you hear an attorney do that, they're trying to cover it up. And normally that's true. If I said something on something that had happened, it's probably I have a better memory of what happened. However, during crisis and emergency life-threatening situations, your memory shuts down as part of the fight or flight. Memory is not important to survival at that point. So your mind goes in your lizard brain, your mind goes into fight or flight, and it's only concerned about your eyes dilate to attract more light. You can focus on the threat. You get more blood flow to your legs and arms so you can fight or run. And all these things are happening, but memory is not that good. That's why when you're in an accident, sometimes people don't remember it for a few days later. So when this DA is going to try to say, isn't it fair to say your memory is better than an hour? Well, maybe. It depends. But it fits his agenda right now, so he's going to use it because he's a weasel.
It's just the same. I'm never going to forget it.
Generally speaking, people's memory is better when it's closer in time. You'd agree with that?
Yeah.
And you mentioned seeing some other videos before you gave this interview to Tucker Carlson. So you'd watched some things in those 3 days, correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay. But in this video here, you are telling Fox News, Tucker Carlson, that the defendant shot Mr. Rosenbaum as Mr. Rosenbaum was falling forward, correct?
Yeah, it's unclear to me because the shots were so quick whether the shots are the reason why he because he lunged and then the shot was fired as he was lunging, so it was like I guess perhaps it was the shots that caused him to then, rather than stopping himself, just fall flat.
I hope the defense also gets in here and goes, have you ever heard of a police officer shooting someone in the back, and then we watch the video footage, the guy has a gun, and by the time he turns around, the officer is drawing his gun and shooting, but by the time he fires, the guy is shot in the back. Have you ever heard of any stories like that? Because it happens quite frequently.
That's not what you just said. Let's play this back about 20 seconds, please.
Okay, so because it's hurting him, now he's going to try to confuse him. He's going to make it look like he's confused so he can discredit his own witness. He called him, and he's trying to discredit him now and saying, that's not what you just said. Let me show you the video again because you're not saying what I want you to say, and I want you to say what I want you to say, so let me do it again. Let's keep doing this till I can get you to say what I want you to say. But I'm looking for the truth. Freaking weasel.
For the barrel of the rifle, and he was that close to him. And Rittenhouse actually took the barrel of the rifle and just dodged around. And at that point, as Rosenbaum was falling forward, he fired quickly 4 shots into Rosenbaum. And
See, he said falling forward, and now he's saying lunging forward. He's not really changing the story that much. He just doesn't like the wording because it makes it look like Rosenbaum is the aggressor, which he is.
Your interview 3 days after this incident says that Mr. Rosenbaum was already falling forward when the defendant used the gun and discharged the shots.
I don't see why that's inconsistent with what I'm saying right now. He was lunging, falling. I would use those as synonymous terms in this situation because
Perfect answer. This dude's honest, and he's saying the truth. Good for him.
basically, he threw his momentum towards the weapon, and when the weapon wasn't there, his momentum was continuing, and that's the point at which he fired. So if you use the word falling or lunging, it was his momentum was going forward, and that's the point at which he fired the shots.
That's exactly what I'm getting at. A few seconds ago, you were saying that you weren't sure if Mr. Rosenbaum started falling because he was shot. But in your interview here, the falling is occurring before the defendant even shoots Mr.
That's not
Rosenbaum,
what I said.
according to your interview.
Let me clarify. I said that I wasn't sure if he didn't catch himself because he was shot. Because you can lunge forward and then put your foot out and stop yourself from falling. So it wasn't clear to me, for example, if the shots had not been fired, it's not clear to me whether he would have fallen or whether he would have caught himself. That's what I meant when I said that.
At any rate,
I don't want to keep going on because you're making me look stupid.
your statement in this interview and what you're telling us here today in person is that Mr. Rosenbaum was already falling forward when the defendant shot him. Is that
Yes, his
accurate?
momentum was going forward. I don't know, this term falling, I just wouldn't use that. So I'm not going to say that because that's not what I said.
You actually have said that. I'm using your
I'm not going
words.
to say that right now because I'm clarifying. It's correct. It was a live interview.
He's argumentative. He's arguing with his own witness. Your Honor, he's trying to put words in his witness' mouth, and he won't let the witness answer the damn question. He's looking like an idiot for anybody that knows.
You can ask questions, but don't comment on the witness's testimony.
Fair enough. At any rate, whether it's the momentum, falling, however you want to put it, Mr. Rosenbaum was in that motion
Yes.
before the defendant shot him.
Yes.
Okay. We can take a break now, Your Honor.
All right,
That DA freaking got a spanking from this witness. He looked like shit. He is pissed. He's going to go back and go, man, this guy, he's a freaking idiot. He's going to hate this guy now. He calls him for his witness, and now he's going to hate him. All right, we're at an hour and 1 minute on this guy. The cross on this guy is going to be juicy. All right, so we'll end this one and come back for the cross.